Philip. Welcome again, Philip, and we are honored to have you here. So the time, the stage, and the community, it's all yours.
Thank you. Today I'm talking about null safety in Dart, which is a topic that I'm very excited about, and it's coming. I should say I will start from the basics. So even if you're not into Dart, I think it's nice to talk about null safety. And I know that null safety is in many other languages already, but I'll go to the like foundational things. And then, of course, I will be talking about how exactly it plays out in Dart. And also, I will show you, well, some live coding demos, of course. And then I want to talk about null safe, like null safety, soundness in null safety, because that's an important topic. And lastly, I will talk about migration. We have millions of lines of code in Google alone, and I'm sure there are millions of other lines of code. I actually know that there are many millions of lines of code outside Google, and these are currently not null safe, and we need to get them null safe. So we have a tool, and I will demo the tool as well later in the talk. But before we do all that, I wanna say that it's early. Okay, it's not there yet. You can experiment with null safety, and I will show you how in Dart. But it's still not there. There's some work still to be done. Most of these things, or probably all of the things that I will show you today, is the deal that you will see when Dart null safety actually lands. And yeah, but that doesn't mean that you should like start doing anything now. I think it's good to get kind of a preview of what's going on, even if you're not using it in production right now, because you might be seeing things that are null safe or null safe dependent in other code. So you'll probably see some packages being migrated, and they will still work with your non-null safe code, but they will be migrated. You will see some new keywords in Flutter framework code, for example, that is there because of null safety. So it's probably better for you to know what all that is. Okay, so after this awkward start, let's talk about the basics, right? I really like to go from the foundational stuff. Variables most of the time have some kind of value, right? That's kind of their thing. Like the age variable here, it is 18, it could be 42, it could be 0, but you will never see an age of someone being nothing, right? Like they can have the age of 0, but they like nobody is aged nothing, right? So age and other variables, actually we went through, the Dart team went through like many lines of code, and I think the statistic is about 80 to 90% of variables in code have never null in them. They're never nothing. They're always something for their whole lifetime, right? But then there are variables that do have null in them, and that is, for example, here the color. If some people have favorite colors, but some people don't, right? And you have to express it somehow. And here we express it by saying it's null. Sometimes you can get away from expressing something like this with like not using null. For example, you could say, okay, you know what? Like every time I assign color or favorite color to black, that means that that means that it's nothing, right? Like this person who has black as their favorite color has no favorite color. And that works until someone comes inevitably later and says, no, like my favorite color is black. I want to have it there, like on my profile or something. And then you're in trouble, and you try to find some other value, but it's never, nothing really is expressing the fact that like this person doesn't have a favorite value. The reason why I'm talking about this as long as I am is because a lot of people think, okay, so null safety, that means that null is bad. Like by design, something about null is terrible. And this is helped by Tony Hoare, who is basically blamed for inventing null in the 60s. He says, null, introducing null basically was my $1 billion mistake. And what he means by that, I'll show later. But there's many problems that come from having null, right? But I want to stress again, there is very good reasons why you have null, or why you have some kind of value that says it's undefined, or it's not applicable, or it's not there. And having that would come sooner or later. What was the mistake of Tony Hoare and others in the 60s was that they introduced null without null safety. And now it's very easy to critique someone with a benefit of 60 years of other knowledge. But yeah, that's it. Like null itself is fine, but it's better, way better if we have null safety with it. All right. So the problem that null safety tries to solve is this. You have, as I said, a variable that is of type color in this case, and it's the favorite color, right? The thing is that in the background, basically your type is kind of not color, it's color or null, right? You're basically saying, like, because it's nullable, yes, it could be color, but also it could be null at any time. And that's a problem. Like, look at this silly example. This is a function, and it's calling some I completely invented the sys.background thing, but it expects some hex value, right? And you just basically have this function that sets the background by doing this, by accessing the .hex field on color. Again, invented API completely, just to make things easier for me to explain, right? Well, this looks cool. I mean, you are like giving something color, and then you're just accessing a thing on that. If you read this code, it's fine, right? But without null safety, as I said, it's not color, it's color or null. And so if you are actually running this code in production, at some point, sooner or later, you will see this. It will just explode in runtime because you are using null.hex, and null doesn't have a hex field or accessor or getter or anything like this, right? So your user's code crashes or something doesn't work, and it's all terrible, and it's just not good, right? The solution is very easy. The solution is to just check for null, right? So null check. So you will just say, hey, if C equals null, then return. In this case, we just don't want to deal with it. The problem here is that we as developers are not great in remembering that if you see, without null safety, if you see a type, you have to mentally think, this is not just color, this is color or null. And I have a proof for that. If you look at GitHub and just search for null pointer exception, you will find almost 600,000, more than 500,000 commits that are trying to fix this problem. So they have introduced a null pointer exception before this, and now they are fixing it. 500,000 times just in open source code in GitHub, and just using this particular search term. If you are using some other search term, we will find more of those later. So we as developers are not good at remembering this fact, even though we know the solution is easy, and even though we know that these things happen. All right. So what's the solution? Well, the concept basically of non-nullability. As I said before, First of all, what is non-nullability? It is basically saying that some variables, if they are non-nullable, they are never nothing, right? Non-nullable, which to me sounds like double negation. So sometimes I just translate it to always something. Variable is non-nullable when it always has some kind of value and never null, right? Which is what you expect. And again, this is something that 80 to 90% variables in your code already do. I mean, you already, they're not non-nullable now in Dart because there's no null safety, but you know that's what happens with them. So that it makes sense to start thinking about non-nullability by default, right? Saying, by default, if I don't say anything else, anytime I see a color something, that means that it's color and never null. It's non-nullable by default, right? And non-nullability by default basically equals null safety. So that's what we're talking about today. Now, okay, one thing is, if you look at Dart's repository, null safety is an issue. Like, an issue asking for null safety is by far the oldest issue that is still open on the Dart repository. It was filed in October 2011, so that's 9 years almost exactly, and it's still there. It's still open, and it will be closed soon. But it's something that people really wanted. And if you followed Dart for that long as I have, you know that at that time it didn't really make sense because Dart was very dynamic, but since then, as Dart went to Dart 2, which we're all using now, then it was less dynamic, and it is now less dynamic, and now it's getting null safety as well. So there's a reason why it's taken so long, and of course there's also a reason that it's pretty hard to add null safety to an existing language with millions and millions of lines of code. All right, so now we're in null safe mode, right? So this is something that currently, as of October 2020, is not there unless you really opt in, and I will show you how you opt in. In null safe Dart, in the future, you have, if you say a variable like age is int, that's it. It's non-nullable. It will never be null. If you try to assign anything that is null to age, then it will not compile. It will not just, it will not run. Your code will not run because it will not compile, right? Even if you try to do something like, oh, this might be null, but I'll try to assign it to age, that will also not compile, right? This brings us to the function from before, the set background function. Now, the color C, this is color, which is by default non-nullable, so it is never null. It is always color, and so therefore this is just fine. C.hex will always have some kind of value because C is never null, right? What about nullable variables? So I said before, you like 10 to 20% of variables is nullable, and you want to support it somehow. For that, we have this question mark new syntax, and that's basically saying, hey, age is now integer or null, and therefore you can assign null to it, and the assignment of equals null will just work, so it's fine. If you want to express someone's favorite color that could not exist because someone doesn't have a favorite color, then you just do this. You have color question mark favorite, right? Very, very easy. And that means basically color or null. Then what does it look like with the problematic function that I've showed you before? So that's the set background is now a nullable color. So we are explicitly saying it is now null, right? It could be null. I'm sorry. It's not definitely null. It could be null. Well, this, because it's color or null, will again not compile because, well, Dart will tell us, hey, C.hex sure could work, but it could also be a null error, so I'm not going to compile your code. And therefore, it forces you to add the null check. The big difference now here is that the null check must be there. Before, you had to remember and you had to add it yourself. Now you have to be explicit about the null in color, and you have to add some kind of null check. You have to basically prove to Dart that this will never be null before you can do the dot hex, right? And this code will, like, Dart will not have a peep. It will do a flow analysis. I'll show you a little bit more of it later. It will say, oh, actually c.hex can never be null because we just checked for null and all is fine. You're good. All right, live coding. I think that's what we'll do now. I have a little bit of code over here, and this is, I hope that you can see it. Should I make it bigger? 28. That's gonna be a little too much, maybe. Well, okay. So we have this code here, and this one, what we can do. Imagine that this was code from before. So what does it look like if we have color, if C equals null, then return. Now, Dart is smart enough to say, you know what? You don't need to check for null because C is non-nullable, first of all. And then it even says, hey, this is that code. It's not gonna ever do anything, right? So after you migrate from non-null safe to null safe Dart, it basically tells you things like this. And it kind of shows that, some of your code will really be completely, like, you can just delete it, which is great. I love deleting code. All right, so that's that. Now, in the main function, let's do things like, well, we could try to set the background to null. That will obviously not compile, right? This program will never run. But what about things like, okay, so I have a color, my favorite. It's a local, if I can write, it's a local variable. And then I do the set background with the local variable. This will obviously also never run because it will not compile. What about if I later, like I do like print hello, hola, okay, hola, and then I do something like my favorite equals colors, I don't know, green, right? Now it compiles. So this is, I mean, you will probably expect this, right? But I just wanted to say how, like, it goes, this is the flow analysis. The Dart will go through your code and see, well, oh, okay, so you're saying this is non-nullable. It starts null though, that's weird. And then it goes through your code and says, oh, okay, so later you assign to it before you read from it. So that's fine, right? It's even like we could do random next bool. Basically, we're flipping a coin here, and we're saying that if we flip like heads or whatever, then my favorite color is green. Now, obviously, or I don't know if it's obvious, but this will not compile because there's a 0.5% chance that my favorite will still be null. So again, non-nullable local variable my favorite must be assigned before it can be used. But if I do something like this, which is often the case, you often do something like this, right? You have a color, and then you do either color green or colors blue, right? So I toss a coin, and I'm like, okay, either my favorite color is green or blue, and then this compiles because, again, flow analysis, Dart will go through this code and be like, okay, by this time, my favorite must be non-null, so I'm gonna allow it. Cool. All right. So that's good. Now we are also over here down there. We have a class person, and that's basically, it has an age, or the person has an age, and a favorite color. And the favorite color is nullable. The age is by default non-nullable. We can create a new Truman person with some age, and that's great, and that works, right? We could do null here, of course, and that would not work. Now, often, especially if you're coming from Flutter, you see the named parameters thing where you want to say something like person age 29, so that it's very explicit what you're actually assigning. It's not just like ID or something, it's age, right? And that also has implications for null safety, because if we just say age is now a named variable, then this will not compile, and it's because it says, hey, you are basically, if you forget to assign some value to person, then this will fail. I mean, that will be nullable, and that's not good. So, for example, like Philip is a person of undefined age. This is bad. So instead, we have a new keyword that is required. So this is new keyword in Dart that basically says, okay, this is a named variable, but it is required. You absolutely have to say it. And you see above that Truman correctly is just fine, because we give the age variable or the parameter. Philip is not, and it will not compile again. So we have to add it. All right. What else is there? We can get back to set background and go with something like Truman favorite. And as you probably expect, this will not compile because favorite is a nullable variable, and therefore this could blow up. And Dart always tries to prove that this could never be null, right? Now, and this gets a little tricky, and this is why this is one reason why it's good to have this tool. I just showed you flow analysis with the local variable. You might think that if I just do Truman dot favorite is some color like red, then this will now compile. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and this is because if you thought about it for too long, like the Dart team has to, dot favorite, even though here it's safe, we kind of know that this is safe because it's just a field and there is nothing happening between here and here, so that's fine, right? You can imagine that there is a subclass of person or something that extends person in a way where favorite instead of a field is a getter, and that getter can do crazy things. That's what kind of like some getters do. Like it could again flip a coin and say 50% of the time I'm going to return null, even though someone just assigned a value to this, right? So, or the setter could be something different, or the setter could say, okay, you're telling me the color is red, but I'm not going to do anything with it. And therefore, Dart cannot prove 100% that even after Truman.favorite, we have the favorite is not null. What do you do in this case? You have to basically tell Dart that Truman.favorite in this case, even though he cannot prove it, Dart cannot prove it, it's fine. It's not null. And you do that by the third syntax that we will talk about today, and that's the bank operator. If you say something bank, you're basically saying, I know more than you, Dart, and I will take responsibility of my actions. And I'm saying that Truman.favorite in this case is never null, right? So it's basically like assertion that this is never null, and Dart trusts you and will make this compile. As you can imagine, this can be dangerous. So you really should only use the bang operator if you're absolutely sure that everything is fine. But it's in some cases, like in this case, it's good. So once again, flow analysis can work inside a function, and it will work correctly, and everything will work just fine, and you don't need to use any bang operators. With fields, it's a little harder because Dart lets you do things that are powerful, but unfortunately powerful in a way that it cannot prove 100% that something is not nullable. All right. And the last thing that I want to show is the late operator, and that's let's think about what if the person was computing the age of itself from its own value. So imagine, I'm not going to add this, but imagine that you created the person, and you added some kind of like an ID to the person, and then the person itself is using some database to find out what its age, right? That seems a little convoluted, but if you're coming from Flutter, for example, you know about animation controller, and that like widget states can have, or those that want to animate something imperatively need to have an animation controller, and that animation controller resides inside them, right? But it also, for it to be created, it needs access to the state itself, right? So you do something like the similar, age equals compute age person this. This, right? If it was a controller, it would be something like animation controller vsync this. Some of you know this, right? So this is a problem for several reasons. By this time, it will kind of fail, because you're basically saying, well, age is this, I mean, age is non-nullable, but you're assigning to it in the body of the constructor, and that's too late. You could say something like age equals compute age here in the initializer list, and I may be going into too much detail, and this would work, except you don't have access to this here, so this will also not be fine. So you kind of have to tell Dart again, you kind of have to be, trust me, I know this is already in the constructor body, which means that I could do some crazy things like, print age plus 5 here, which would throw a null error, right? So you can say to Dart, you know what, I take responsibility. I will assign to age before I use it, and that is the late keyword. And the late keyword also does other things, but in our case, that's what it does most of the time. And now everything compiles. But again, it's something that's on you if it crashes. All right, I think that's it from me in this case. I intentionally went to like the gnarly details here, just so this is hopefully useful, and when you get into this point in migrations, you're like, oh yeah, that's something that Philip talked about, and I know that this was an issue. But as I'll show you hopefully later, this is not something that you will see a lot, hopefully, and you will actually, most of the time, the migrations are pretty okay. We'll be migrating my package later, so you'll see for yourself. Okay. All right. So just a quick review, right? I showed how Dart can prevent null errors for you. It's just completely, some null errors just can't happen now. I taught you how it tries to make your life easier by just, doing flow control, flow analysis of your code and saying, oh, okay, I know what he or she means by that, and this is fine, even though he didn't assign to my color or my favorite at first. By the time that it's used, it's actually okay. And then there's the new syntax, the question mark to say, no, this is nullable. It's not by default non-nullable. The bank operator, the kind of the, I know more than you, that you sometimes have to use. The required thing that basically says you cannot not, you have to provide this thing, this parameter. And then the late keyword, which says something will be provided later. Oh, I wanted to show one thing that's cool, that yes, late will not prevent you from doing some bad things, like here, print age plus 5. This is bad, and late will not prevent you to do this because you're basically on your own there. But it will prevent you, or that will prevent you to assign anything nullable here, right? So compute age is something that definitely gives you back some kind of value, and so it's like safe in that respect, at least, unless of course you do something like this. Which is, I actually didn't know that you can do this. You can actually do null bank operator. That's funny. That's basically asking for, a crash. Love it. Okay. Now let's talk about soundness. This is a very important thing that is maybe a little bit overlooked. Dart has a sound type system, right, since 2.0, which means that Dart cannot lie to you about types. If it says that something is a color, it cannot be an integer or a string, right? This seems like, of course, it doesn't do that, right? Like, why would something do that? But it's actually, not all languages out there are sound, and it's something that can, of course, bite you, because if something is not sound and you are actually kind of expecting it to be, if something is saying that it's color and then it's an integer, then you're in trouble. Like, for example, TypeScript is not sound language, right? How about null safety? Well, null safety can also be sound or unsound. You can have a sound type system and an unsound null safety, basically meaning that you can be sure about the type, but you cannot be sure if it really is nullable or non-nullable, right? And this is, of course, again, something that you can kind of imagine that most people assume that every language that has null safety is sound, but it's not the case. In fact, out of the languages that are normally in use, the main languages like Kotlin, Swift, Java, and TypeScript and all that, JavaScript, of course, the ones that are null safe and are sound are only one: Swift. Swift is soundly null safe, and now Dart will be soundly null safe, but that's it. Like, all the others, including Kotlin, are not, unfortunately, are not null safe. Soundly null safe. They are now null safe, but they are not sound in their null safety. Meaning, sometimes they need to, they either lie to you, or they need to perform null checks. Which brings us to why this is important. The first one is safety, of course. If you have sound null safety, you can absolutely trust the type system, and everything will work. But also, it's speed or performance. If the system itself, if Dart itself can trust 100% that something is not null, it doesn't need to do like background null checks. While the non-sound languages sometimes still have to perform null checks for you in the background. So that this makes a big difference. So that's soundness, and that's also one reason why some of the things that I showed you before, when Dart is not 100% sure that something is not sound, it tells you like, no, you have to either tell me with a bang operator that this is really what you want, or I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna, well, I can't prove it to you. All right, migration. We have millions of lines of code. Everyone has little Dart programs and Flutter programs, or Flutter apps, and not so little sometimes. And you have to do all this work, right? And it's sometimes very straightforward, but still it's a lot of work to go from non-null safe to null safe. And that's why we have a migration tool for you that will do a lot of the menial work for you automatically. Steps. How do you do that? So first of all, you don't need to. And that's not just now, right? So now Dart null safety is experimental, and that is just, you have to really do a lot of work to make things null safe, right? You have, I'll show you later. But also, even if it's not experimental anymore, you have to go to pubspec basically and say, no, I want my code to be null safe, and I'm opting into null safety. Even when Dart null safety lands, you can still use all the ecosystem that is now null safe, and you can keep being non-null safe, and it's fine. So you really don't need to migrate, okay? Second, if you say, okay, I'm gonna migrate, then you prepare. This is something that you should do before any migration to anything, and that is look at the code. Maybe there are some refactorings that will help things along the way, so do them first, and so on. Part of the preparation is check your dependencies. You have dependencies, and if you want sound null safety, you need to have them all also null safe. So everything that you use, your dependency, their transitive dependencies, your code, all of that needs to be null safe for sound null safety to click in. Dart can work with like in a non-sound mode, but then you don't get the speed and the safety things. So that's the other one. If you'll see already that much of the top packages in the ecosystem are currently at least experimenting with null safety. Sometimes they even already have a null safe version. You'll check on pub and you'll see that. If the package that you're using is not, then you might ask the maintainer if they wanna, when are they going to change it, and if they're not, or if they're too busy, try to help them, because it's nice. We're trying to be nice to each other in the Dart ecosystem. Then step 4, run migration tool, and then after that opt in. This is something that I see people doing, including myself, that you start and you kind of opt in, and then you run the migration tool, and the migration tool is like, why are you migrating? You're already opted in. So that's something. All right, live demo of the migration tool. I do have a package called HTML unescape, which is a small library for unescaping HTML. It works something like this. So, here's HTML escaped string, and if you want, you can do example, and and this just works. It unescapes things into like the literal meaning of the HTML escapes. All right. Now we can try, and we can go. The first thing that you have to do is to say, okay, I want to use an SDK, Dart SDK, that is 2.10 or more, meaning one of the SDKs that has null safety in it. So I will do this, 2.10, get dependencies. So that's the first thing. Now back to terminal, and I can do, well, this will still work again, right? So this will work because we're still in a non-null safe world and everything is fine. Now I can say enable experiment non-nullable, and then example. See, this is why I said it's very, very hard to use null safety by mistake. You actually have to say, dash enable experiment non-nullable. And now if I run it, it will fail, right? Because it's like, whoa, okay, you're saying that we're null safe, but we're not null safe. So what's going on? And I could just go and convert my code line by line manually. And that's also fine, of course. And then I can rerun the code and see that everything works fine. But I want to show you the migration tool. So we have Dart migrate, and this will fail because Dart migrate will tell us that all these packages that I'm using here, dependencies, are not null safe yet. And we could go to pub and find versions of these packages that are not yet stable, but they are already null safe, and start doing those and adding those, and that would make it go away, hopefully. But we don't want to do that right now. We want to do something else. So I will wrong window. I can see that I'm too like this. Okay, I can do Dart migrate -- help, and I find this. Like there's a bunch of different things that you can set up, but what I am looking for is how do I tell Dart migrate to not care about the other packages and just migrate, right? So, and this is -- skip pub outdated, which is exactly the that thing that we just saw. So Dart migrate -- skip outdated, and now the migrate tool just goes through our code, or my code, and it looks like and generates my I can't talk today, Jesus. So it will generate suggestions for us, and it will actually run a little server that runs this. This is the kind of the migration tool UI, which is basically a web app, and it's small, and I'm not sure if I can make it a lot larger. Okay. So this is all the different files in my app or in my package, and I can look at things and what the migration tool thinks about them. Or in this case, we're like, okay, here is a constant, it's integer, and I don't know if you see this, hopefully yes. You see that the migration tool basically says, I'm not going to touch this, this is non-nullable, therefore by default, and this little rectangle basically says, I'm not going to add a question mark, it's fine, right? We can look at where actually there are some question marks. So here, there's a string, and this migration tool added the question mark here, basically saying, I want to have, I think this is a nullable type. And in fact, I know this code, so I'm like, yes, this is a nullable type. It starts as null, and it can be at some points null, so it's good. All the other stuff that you see here, right? Like chunk here, as I said, 90, 80, 90, probably here more than 90% of all those types that you see here are non-nullable. And basically the migration tool will not do any changes and you will not be doing any changes as well. But we do have this one, and we have things like late keyword here, right? So there's a chunk length that is non-nullable, but it is assigned in the constructor and in constructor body. So Dart migration tool realizes that this is non-nullable but late. And lastly, it also adds the bank operator. So here, this is exactly this, right? Carry equals null. Then because carry, we know that it's just a field, it will just say yes, you can you can say this is non-nullable. We can, by the way, I'm not going to do any of that, but we can say things like adding hints. For a small package like this, it's fine to just, probably you will run it once and it's okay. For a bigger project, you can say, no, I actually think that carry is going to be like non-nullable or late or something. And you can tell it to the migration tool and rerun or from sources, basically saying like, okay, so try it now again, but now you know that I want you to make this non-nullable. And the migration tool will now try hard to make it work, even though it thought first that it's nullable. So it's an iterative process. You might do it many times before you're happy with the result. And that's kind of like how it should be. All right, but in my case, I'm very happy with how this worked out, and things are actually, exactly as I thought. And so I can just say, and again, I'm not sure how well it looks like, but I can just do apply migration, and I'll do that just right now. And yes, and now it's migrated. I will close this, and I will close this as well. And I could, the analyzer is still in non-null safe mode. I could change it, but I'm not going to spend time on it. But you see that the code was actually migrated. So it actually applied the changes. It's not just a suggestion. It will actually change your code. And then I could do things like before, with enable experiment non-nullable, I can run this. Yes, and it works, right? So I was a little worried that it won't, but okay. All right, so that is the migration tool in its, in its all its glory. So to summarize, it's early. You don't need to do any of this, and you probably shouldn't. You can experiment with it, but null isn't the enemy. You don't need to do. You don't need to think that you have to eradicate null. Null is fine. It's just that null without null safety is sometimes a little problematic. We have the non-nullable and nullable types. And non-nullable are the default. So if you don't say anything else, then null safe, your variables will be non-nullable. Therefore, always something. They will never have null in them. We have the new syntax, the question mark, the bank operator, basically the exclamation mark, late and required. We talked about soundness and how it's really important for speed and also safety, and how it's actually shared only between Swift and Dart, and as far as I know, the major languages otherwise don't have it. And then we offer a migration tool that will do a lot of the migration for you. And that's it. So I thank you for your attention, and I hope that null safety will come soon and you will get your apps faster and more safe than they are now.